Hello and welcome, this is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm sharing some Country Christmas cards using the new Country Christmas collection from Spellbinders. We have this Barn Star Wreath die set here with this really cute star background that you can do a couple different inserts for some pattern. Then we have the Christmas rocking chair with a couple little accessories that you can put with it, as well as the Country Snowman. I love how unique this snowman is, and that cowboy hat is absolutely adorable. Then we have the Christmas horse-drawn wagon, and I am going to do a card with just the wagon, not the horse on it, but you can do either or. Then we have the Country Christmas barn. I absolutely love this one. I just love, I don't know, Christmas barns do something with me. So then we have the Country Christmas banner and sentiment set. I'm going to be foiling my sentiments with this press plate set, but you could also use it in the Better Press system. And then the Country Christmas embossing folder that I'm going to use for a few backgrounds. For my color palette inspiration, I'm using this card from the DIY Color Deck Holiday Expansion Pack. I've been using that in several videos to just kind of go outside my comfort zone when it comes to color palettes. And this is the one that I chose. So the first step, I'm going to pick which sentiments I want to use for the cards that I'm creating. And these sentiments, as you can see, are all separate. So I'm only picking the ones that I know I want to use for my cards. I'm going to do hot foiling with them, and I'm doing it with some matte gold foil. I have a little bit of gold accents on some of my cards, so this matte gold is going to be perfect for my sentiments. I didn't want anything too flashy or too shiny, so the matte gold is perfect for that. So I have my Glimmer system all warmed up, ready to go. I put my 6 different sentiments on there, put my matte foil with the pretty side down, and then I'm using some Hammermill Cardstock. Let that timer button go, and once the button or light stops blinking, I can put it through my Platinum 6 machine for the pressure. You need both the heat and the pressure with hot foiling, and we have some perfect sentiments there. I was so pleased with how they turned out. Sometimes when I'm doing those individual sentiments, I have a hard time getting perfect foiling. This one was perfect. You also want to make sure, because there are dies to go with this, you want to make sure that you leave enough space between them so that you can die cut them nicely. Anytime I do foiling, I always use my solid hot foil plate and do my solid hot foiling at the same time. Not only does it give you 2 different options with each sentiment, but it also uses up that foil, and it's much easier. If you don't use these sentiments, it's much easier to store some foiled cardstock than it is to store that foil on its own. So I always like to do this. Any extra sentiments I have, I'm going to put in a Ziploc bag, put it right with that press plate set. So next time I'm going to be using it, I know that I have some sentiments already ready to go that might work for the cards that I'm creating. So this sentiment set has 3 different dies that you can choose from to do that die cutting of those sentiments. There's also some accessory pieces like chain link that you can use if you want to have your sign look like it's hanging by chain. I'm not going to be using that for this. I didn't want that look for the cards that I was creating, but that's definitely an option. Anytime I'm die cutting foiled or pressed sentiments, I always tape my dies to the cardstock because I want to make sure that they're not going to move. Those dies are not going to move on me while I'm doing my die cutting. And then with this gold, the solid gold, any of that extra foil, I keep it with my specialty cardstock. And those pieces can be used for die cutting little tiny die cut pieces. I probably would have used it to die cut pieces in this video had I not pre-die cut everything, but it would have worked perfect for the gold for the wreath for this first card here, as well as a few other accents. So I always keep those. It's a great way to use that up. The one thing to make sure when you're taping your dies for die cutting is just to be mindful of where you put that tape, because the pressure of that tape on that foil in your die cutting machine changes the texture of it. So I'm always aware of where that tape is going, knowing that it's not a place that I'm going to want to do my die cutting with. So for the first card, I'm using that Country Christmas barn. I have everything die cut ready to go. My barn is die cut out of some Merlot Cardstock. These barn doors and windows are die cut out of some Raven as well as classic white cardstock. My wreath there is die cut out of Fern Cardstock. And then my bow, I did it with the pearl finish of the gold treasure cardstock pack. For my snowy roof, I have some of the glitter cardstock from the Antique White Treasure cardstock pack, and then the lights that I'm going to be putting to line the roof are done out of the pearl finish from that antique gold or antique white treasured cardstock pack. You could easily do colors for those lights. I think they would look great as well. Another option would be to use white cardstock and then color it with markers. I am going to put some glossy accents on them once my barn is totally finished to give them some shine as well as some dimension, make them look a little bit more like real lights. Personally, my favorite Christmas lights are just white twinkle lights. So that's what I'm going to go for with this barn. But I know some people love colored Christmas lights. And by using markers on top of white cardstock, you can get a multiple colored Christmas lights if that is the type of look that you love going for. So I'm gluing everything with Barely Art glue in a fine line bottle. It works perfectly for not only teeny tiny die cuts like this little strip on the strip of lights, but it also works perfect for larger die cuts as well. I glued the barn to the roof. And one thing to keep in mind with specialty cardstocks is they have a coating on them. So it takes a little bit longer for them to dry. I know some people get frustrated gluing on glitter cardstock for that reason. It will absolutely dry, but because there's a coating on it, because there's a lot of that's non-porous, it does take just a little bit longer to dry. So you have to be just a little bit more patient when it comes to that. So I like to glue my pieces together kind of in sections. You could see that I did my doors and windows in one section, then I put the barn on the roof, and now I'm doing the lights, and I'm going to be adding that to the snowy ridge that goes on the front of that barn. That's the way that I like to glue them together. You could easily, if you wanted, do all of it and glue it right onto the barn itself, or you could glue it onto the card itself. I prefer gluing my die cuts together separately and not putting it right on the card. So then once it's done, once it's dry, I can position it on the card, and often it looks exactly how I want it to in the place that I wanted it to go, but sometimes I have to move it. Sometimes there was something that I wasn't thinking about that it looks a little bit wrong the way that I had originally intended. So it's much easier to have a full piece already ready to go and lay it onto your card. And if you need to move and shimmy things in place, that works totally fine doing it at that point. So this is the pack of antique white treasure cardstock and then the gold pack. There are 15 sheets total in the package, 5 different finishes. So you get 3 sheets of each finish, and they last a long time, especially if you're just doing die cut pieces, or if as I've done many, many times, if you're wanting to use one of those for mats, use the center part of it that's going to be covered with by die cutting those pieces out. I like to extend my cardstock just a little bit that way. So for this card, I'm using a black mat that is trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. So I took my piece of Hammermill Cardstock here and I trimmed it down to 3 7/8 by 5 1/8. And I'm using tumbled glass as well as Uncharted Mariner Distress ink for ink blending my background. To create a snowy surface, I used just a piece of scrap cardstock or scrap printer paper, and I just ripped it so that we had a jagged edge to it. You could also cut it. You could also use the straight edge of the paper if you wanted a straight edge. But I never do it this way anymore, and I just thought I would do a couple cards with this so we had some jagged snow. For some snowflakes on my background, I'm using the new Sparkle Splatter Effects. It looks like a nail polish bottle, and the brush that's in it looks like one from nail polish, but it adds some sparkle to the background, and you don't need any extra tools. You do want to make sure that you shake it up really, really well. The mica in it does settle down to the bottom, but you can take that brush right out and you can just tap right on the side of it to splatter over your background. I definitely would recommend going over some scrap paper first just to get a bit of a feel for it. The sparkle one, which is the white one, is a little bit more subtle than the raven one, which is the black one. I'll use that one a little bit later. So there's a little bit more forgiveness with the sparkle one in my opinion because of that. But it's always a great idea to practice on some scrap paper just to get a feel for it. And I did it right when I got them on some scrap cardstock so that I could see what the look of them is. The sparkle one has a silver sparkle to it. The raven one is black, but it has a gold shimmer to it. So it's really quite pretty as well. And they dry really quickly. I want to say within a minute, so there's not a lot of drying time for that. So once that was dry, I assembled my card, put my barn pieces on there. I had intended to put that wreath on the barn door, but then realized as I laid it down that if this was a real barn that it would look odd when the doors were open, so I ended up putting it at the top, just like the front of the package. Then I took some glossy accents and put that on the lights to give them that gloss and dimension that I was mentioning earlier. And then I'm taking some platinum stickles and just adding some dots to the wreath. It's going to tie all those golds in and just give it a little bit more texture. So here is the finished card. It's not dry. I'll show you the dry one once, or at the end of the video. I wanted to keep continuing making cards rather than waiting for drying time while I was doing it. So for my next card, I'm using that same die set. It has a couple tree dies in there, 2 different sizes, and I wanted to just create a card with those trees on it. So they're very simple trees, but they're really, really pretty, and I thought it would be fun to just use it to create a very simple but peaceful card. So I have a piece of Hammermill Cardstock here, trimmed to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. I'm going to be using Fern Cardstock for the mat around it, and that is trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. I'm using that same piece of printed paper with that torn edge for my snowy line. I'm going to use it for any of the ones I'm doing ink blending on the background. That piece can get reused over and over again. It lasts fairly long, and it's a great way to use up printer paper that may otherwise go into the trash. So I did put my snow a little bit higher on this card than I typically would. Typically I'd have more sky, but I intend to possibly put my sentiment towards the bottom. Just depends on the final look. I'm taking that same sparkle effects and adding sparkle to that background. I'll set that aside to dry completely. Now I don't ink blend my trees to give them a little bit of shading, but you certainly could, and that would add a little bit more visual dimension to them. I wanted to keep this card very, very simple. I know I often do cards with a lot of die cuts and a lot of pieces to them. So I wanted to just share an idea that is just a lot simpler with a lot less pieces. I know some people get overwhelmed with dies that have a lot of pieces. I love them because it means they have a lot of detail to them. But especially if you're newer to die cutting or newer to card making, it can be a little bit intimidating. So you don't necessarily need to get as complicated as some dies with a lot of pieces. The hardest part to me when you have die cuts with a lot of pieces is figuring out what colors to do each one in. And once it comes to that, once you've got all that die cutting done, to me the assembly part is the easier part. And again, like I said, I like all the detail that it gives. So after doing my background and gluing those pieces to the base of the card, I added my trees, and I'm giving them dots of that platinum stickles, again, just for a little bit of extra sparkle, and it's going to tie in with that gold sentiment. I showed using the gold sentiment at the bottom here, and that's what I ended up choosing, but you could also use the foil sentiment with the white background and to put it towards the top on the sky so that it shows up there as well. Either one would work. Neither one is better than the other. I just opted to go with the gold sentiment once I was done. For my next card, I'm using that Country Snowman die set. I have the snowman itself die cut with the same glitter cardstock that I used for the snowy barn roof. So it's the glitter finished cardstock from that antique white treasured cardstock pack. White cardstock would work totally perfect here, but I always love doing snowmen with glittery or sparkly cardstock. I think it just takes them to the next level. For the little companion buddy that is in this die set, I have him die cut out of some velvet cardstock. This was left over from a previous video that I did, a previous project, and there was plenty of space to die cut that bunny. Anytime I'm doing animals, I love using that velvet cardstock because it just gives it an extra texture. Anytime I do cards, I love adding textures, and I often do it with stickles or glossy accents, but sometimes it's fun to do it with the cardstocks that you use. For instance, the glitter cardstock for the snowman, or fuzzy cardstock or velvet cardstock for animals or different things. Another option here, and I just did my hat with Fawn Cardstock. I die cut it out of Fawn Cardstock, but that hat would also be great to die cut out of velvet cardstock just to give that some extra texture too. The bandana is die cut with some blush cardstock as well as the little trim on that hat. Now I accidentally put that trim on the base of the hat, and it actually needs to go on this piece here that I have in my finger. That's the nice thing about using liquid glues, is if you do this, and I do it quite often, where I think I know where I'm going and then I realize that I missed a step. The liquid glue is a lot more forgiving because it takes just a little bit longer to dry. It gives you a little bit of wiggle room to move those die cuts around, But in this instance, if you happen to put it in the wrong spot, you still have a little bit of time to lift that up and put it in the right spot. So one of the reasons why I like to use that liquid glue is not only the wiggle room, but the little bit of forgiveness that you get. So once I have all of those pieces together, I just tuck that to the side and let those dry, especially that glitter cardstock. Just like I was saying before, it takes just a little bit longer to dry. So I'll often put those die cut pieces together, set them aside to dry while I'm working on the backgrounds of the card. So again, I'm using Hammermill Cardstock for my background here. The background is exactly the same as the last few that I've done. This one I'm doing a little bit less snow than the trees, but I'm using that same torn paper edge for the snowy background. For this one, I did put it on a little bit of an angle, so it looks like there's a little bit of a slope or a little bit of a hill to that snow. Only because I felt like it, not because this particular card needed or anything, but it was mainly to show you that you don't necessarily have to have the snow completely horizontal. You can put it a little bit slanted and make it look like it's on a little bit of a hill. For the background of this card and the mat of this card, I have some Fawn Cardstock trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches, and then I put down my ink blended background. Now the one step I forgot here is I had planned to use that sparkle effects to do some splatter on that background, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it once my card is assembled. So I glued down that bunny as well, then I'm adding my sentiment, and then I will add that sparkle effects for the splatter for the snow. The one thing to keep in mind though is because my card is put together, that splatter is going to go on top of the sentiment as well as the surrounding areas of the card. So if you don't want it on those areas, you want to mask that off a little bit. But I knew it was going to happen, and I wanted to create one that had those pieces all splattered on anyways, just to find or just to see the look of it. So you can't really see it in the video. There is some splatter on that sentiment piece, and there's a little bit of splatter on the outer edges and the mat of the card. Again, just a little bit of a different look. There's nothing wrong with it at all. The last step that I did was took some Stardust stickles and just add some little snowy hills. That's one of the ways that I like to do snow as well, is just add a little bit of stickle to the top of the hill and just a little bit of detail to it, just to make it look a little bit more interesting. So then I set that aside to completely dry. For the next card, I'm going to be using that the Christmas horse-drawn wagon. And like I said earlier, I'm not doing the horse here, I'm only doing the wagon. So you'll see how that wagon is on an A2 card. You would not be able to fit the horse and the wagon together on an A2 card. They're just a little bit too big. You would have to make more of a slimline card to be able to have both of them on there. But I love the fact that there is the option to do just the wagon, just the horse, or both of them together. I chose to die cut my wagon out of blush cardstock, and then I have the wheels and some accent pieces die cut out of that Merlot cardstock. There's also a little bit of accents or pieces die cut with that Fawn cardstock as well. Now there's these 2 circles that go on the wheels. I put the smaller one in the front and the bigger one in the back, and it wasn't until my card was completely done that I realized they were likely supposed to be layered on top of each other, and I was supposed to cut a second set of them. I don't necessarily mind how it looks this way. I didn't end up fixing it. I left it as is. Part of my reasoning for not realizing that is because those circles are on that same die as the wagon base and some of those pieces. So I just thought it was supposed to be die cut once and then one for each wheel. But like I said, I'm pretty sure they're supposed to be layered. So if those 2 different sizes bother you, layer them together. What made me notice is that larger circle has an indent or a smaller circle in it. And typically with Spellbinders die cuts, when you're die cutting them, especially dies like this that layer on top of each other, there's little indents or little lines that indicate where those pieces are supposed to go on top of. So to me, it looks totally fine. I don't necessarily mind it, but if that's something that bothers you, then that's an easy thing to change. I took one of the trees from that barn die set to die cut to put in the back of this wagon. There's also some present or gift packages that you could also die cut and put into the wagon as well. So there's a few different options to do there. I just always love wagons or trucks with Christmas trees in the back. So that's what I opted for this card. For my background, I'm using that Country Christmas embossing folder. I'm going to do some ink blending. It's just going to add some more texture to that background. If you want your background more subtle than this, you don't have to emboss it. But again, I just wanted to do one with that ink blended background that had a little bit of texture. Now I did put my piece horizontal in that embossing folder because inside the pattern there are some shapes like gifts that are directional. So I wanted to make sure that when I had this on the back of the card or on the background of the card, that it didn't look odd having images that were on their side. So I put it in the embossing folder that way, but Spellbinders embossing folders are nice and large. They're 5.5 by 8.5. So it gives you some wiggle room to move your pieces so that you can have them in the right direction or the direction that you're wanting. So just like my last few backgrounds, I'm using that torn piece of printer paper for my snowy line at the bottom. I'm ink blending with both tumbled glass and then Uncharted Mariner Distress ink. I like those two together, and I like using a darker color around the edge just to give it a little bit of a frame to it. Once I'm done that, I'll take that off of my sticky mat. And that sticky mat is very helpful when you're doing ink blending. It helps to keep those pieces in one place, and that way you don't have to touch them while you're ink blending. So I'm going to do some splatter on this one as well. I'm starting with that sparkle effects, and then I'm going to add a little bit of the raven just for a little bit of a different look. I try to keep my splatters tiny for it, but I do get a little bit larger of a black blotch kind of right in the middle of the card. You can see it right there. It's in the middle about 2/3 of the way up. If that bothers you, you can arrange your die cuts so they're hiding it. But you can see once I'm done, I don't even bother doing that. I make it look like it's completely intentional. I don't love the fact that there's a larger black splatter on the back there, but sometimes that's what happens when you're doing splatter, is sometimes you get some of those splatter pieces that are a little bit bigger than you intended. And personally, I use them as the opportunity just to be relaxed, just to go with things. So I glue down my wagon there, and like I said, if that bothered you, you could raise it up a little bit so the tree was hiding it, or even add a second tree to the back of that wagon to hide that, and just, you know, creative problem solving. I left it as is. Then I use one of my sentiments with the white background. I like that white background on the blue background. It makes it stand out nicely. Then I use the platinum stickles for some dots on the little swag on the side of that wagon there. Now I chose Merlot cardstock for the bows on that swag. I also think it would look nice with some gold cardstock as well. For the next card, I'm using that rocking chair, the Christmas rocking chair. This one has a lot of pieces to it. I have them all die cut out of some Fawn Cardstock, but once it comes to assembling them, it's really not too hard. I kind of work from the top of the chair to the bottom of the chair. There is one mistake that I make while I'm assembling it, but I'll talk about that then. For the contents to sit in the chair, I have the pillow die cut as well as the teddy bear, and that teddy bear is also die cut out of that white velvet cardstock to give it some nice softness to it. I have the earpieces and the piece under the nose die cut out of the blush cardstock for a little bit of pink accents to it. And there's a Santa hat in this set that I'm going to put on the teddy bear. I thought it would be perfect on the teddy bear. The size is perfect. You could also hang it off of the edge of the chair, the little handle of the chair. That would work as well. So when it comes to gluing pieces with that velvet cardstock, the same rules apply as the metallic or specialty cardstocks. That velvet cardstock likes to suck in the liquid glue, and it does take a little bit longer for it to dry, but it does dry. I also like to use some cardstock on the back of that velvet. The velvet, when you get it, it's adhesive velvet. So it is kind of like a big sticker. I like to put some cardstock on the back of it to give it a little bit of stability. It also helps to glue pieces together or glue the die cut pieces together because it has that cardstock back to it. I prefer it. There's a few times where I use that velvet cardstock without putting cardstock on the back, but the majority of the time I just use some scrap cardstock. It doesn't need to be anything special. I just go through my scrap bin and I will choose a color that is similar to the color of velvet that I'm using. It comes in a bunch of different colors, so there are different options for whatever you're creating. So once that bear is done, I'm going to put the little Santa hat on him and I'm going to set him aside to completely dry while I'm ink blending and assembling my rocking chair. Now, like I said, I have my rocking chair die cut out of Fawn Cardstock. I wanted to give it a little bit more visual dimension and interest to it. You could use different colors of brown cardstock instead of doing ink blending, but I thought it would be a lot easier to do all the same cardstock color for the die cutting and then just use a little bit of ink blending to add some different color tones to it. So I'm doing my ink blending with vintage photo distress ink. Some of the pieces, like the very top of that chair, some of the arm pieces, I am doing just like ink blending around the edges. And then there's some pieces to go on the arm pieces that I'm just completely covering in ink, because the arms of the chair have basically 3 different pieces to them. There's the piece with the spindles plus 2 upper pieces. So by doing some with partial ink blending and some with complete ink blending, I've essentially created different shades and different colors of the cardstock anyway, so we're going to get that dimension from it. So like I said before, I'm starting at the top of the chair. I add that top piece to it, then I can glue that onto the seat, and then I start with the right side arm of the chair. Now this is where I made a little bit of a mistake, not the right side of the arm, but when I go to glue the left arm onto the chair, this die set also has a seat cushion that I die cut out of some Fern cardstock. I glued my left arm of the chair onto the chair before gluing that cushion. That cushion needs to go in first. But again, this is the bonus of having liquid glue, is because it makes it really easy. It hasn't dried. I can easily lift up those pieces, because as soon as I glued this piece down, that's when I remembered, or this piece did this whole arm, that's when I remembered that there is a cushion to the chair. And if I put the cushion on without lifting those pieces up, the perspective is going to be wrong. Those spindles are going to go, behind that cushion back, and it's going to look all wrong. But it made it really easy. It was easy enough to just lift those pieces right up there and slip in that little cushion to that chair. If you eliminate the cushion to the chair, that is not an issue at all. You can do the chair as I originally did it. But I think the cushion just adds a nice accent and a nice base to the chair as well. So once that cushion is in there, then I can do the little rocking pieces at the bottom. I start with the one on the right-hand side of the chair because it's kind of in the back. Really doesn't matter which one you do first, both of them. Like, they don't overlap each other or anything, so you can do either one first. And then there's a little piece that goes on top of it. That was one of the pieces that I completely covered in ink just to have different shades of that brown. So I'm going to glue the little cushion onto the chair as well as the bear, and I'll set that aside to dry while I'm doing the background to my card. That way, once I have that background done, I can just put this entire piece onto the front of the card. I'm going to use that Country Christmas embossing folder again. I'm using it with some blush cardstock. That way the chair is going to show up nicely on the background. It doesn't really conflict or tie in with any of the other colors that I have on the accent pieces on the chair for the pillow or for the cushion or whatnot. So I put that in my embossing folder and embossed it. You want to use the stacking for your machine for 3D embossing folders. I trimmed that down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches, and I have a piece of Fawn cardstock that I trimmed to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8 for the mat around it. Just going to give it a tiny little bit of a frame. You don't really see the mat with the Fawn cardstock, like, it's not really prominent, it's more subtle. If you wanted it a bit more prominent, I would use Merlot cardstock to do that trim, and that would look great as well. Then I use that vintage photo just to do some light ink blending on that embossed background, just around the edges, again, just to frame it a little bit. And because I did that vintage photo around the edge, that's probably why the Fawn cardstock kind of blends in more rather than frames it, because it kind of ties in with the brown around the edges. For the splatter on the back of this, I just used the Raven Sparkle Effects. I made sure to start splattering on my scrap piece of paper first till I got a feel of how much of the splatter was coming off of it. I wanted the splatter on the back of this to be very subtle, very tiny splatters. I didn't want any bigger splotches, if you will. So by taking the excess off onto a piece of scrap paper first, I have a little bit more control. When you're using the splatter effects, the less ink or the less of the splatter that's on the brush, the smaller the splatter is going to be. So you can control it a little bit like that. And then it also depends on how hard you're flicking it, or how hard you're tapping that brush for that splatter. So again, it's a great idea to use some scrap paper and practice on it first. So the last step after the rocking chair is added is just to add the sentiment on there. And again, I used the foiled sentiment on the white cardstock. It was going to show up really nicely against that rocking chair and against that background. For my last card, I'm using the Barn Star Wreath die set. I have the star die cut from some blush cardstock, but I wanted to add a little bit of gold accents to that. So I'm using the Lisa Horton solid gold ink pad to do a little bit of ink blending around the outside of that star. So the inside of it is blush, but the outside is that gold color. When doing ink blending with these pads, they're not really like they ink blend, but the easiest way to do it is put the heaviest amount of ink around the outside, and as there's less ink on your brush, then go inside and just kind of spread that ink a little bit, then you don't get any harsh lines on it. After that is ink blend and that ink has dried for a few moments, I'm gluing that to the solid base, and I have that die cut out of some Fern cardstock. This would be great also die cut out of some gold cardstock, so you had gold accents in the inside of there. I think that would look fantastic as well. For my bow here, I have that die cut out of the Merlot cardstock. It has a few pieces to it. I'm just stacking them all together. These pieces are really, really easy to stack and layer together. I love how easy and really intuitive they are. For the greenery, I chose to use the little pine sprigs as well as the little berry sprigs. And then we also have some pine cone here that I die cut out of Fawn Cardstock. Layering them together, I am going to use some of that Vintage Photo Distress ink to just do a little bit of light ink blending around the edges, just to, again, give them a little bit of visual dimension to them. The berries themselves are really easy to assemble. I just put dots of glue on the little dots of them and then use a jewel picker to pick up the appropriate size berry. There's some that are smaller, some that are larger, but it's pretty easy to distinguish between the two of them and just put them on top of the dots of glue. Then I'll let that dry for a few moments. Then I assembled my card, but I completely forgot to record that part, so I'll just talk about it a bit. I embossed a piece of Merlot cardstock for my background, and I lightly brushed that solid gold pad on the top of it just to enhance the embossing texture. And then I also did a little bit of ink blending around the outside of it. My mat is done with blush cardstock. The mat is 4 1/8 by 5 3/8, and that Merlot is done, or is 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. I put the star on the background as well as my solid hot foiled sentiment. And then I just layered the greenery, then the bow, and then the berries, and then the pine cones on top of it. So the layering is really quite easy. I'll link to another video where I do layering of foliage die cuts. I've done one recently. I do them fairly often. And this cluster is really no different from some of the other ones I did. There's probably less pieces in this particular cluster. Then we have that rocking chair card with that rocking chair and the teddy bear on it. And such a cute and unique one to do for Christmas. Then we have our Christmas wagon as well as our country snowman. I love that country snowman with that cowboy hat, but done in the glitter. It adds a lot of sparkle to it. And I love that sparkle effects on the backgrounds of these cards as well. It's a great way to get the snowfall look in a very, very easy way. And the bonus is, like I said before, it dries really, really quite quickly. So you're not waiting a long time for things to dry. And then our very simple trees, from the barn die set. I'm not sure what I was pointing out there. I was pointing out something, but I can't remember what it exactly was. And then finally we have our Christmas barn there. I absolutely love that Christmas barn. And that sentiment says from our barn to yours, which is absolutely perfect for this particular card. The sentiments that are in that sentiment set are perfect for every single one of the cards. And I love how appropriate and perfect they are for each of the different dies in the set. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate all the time that you spend with me. Have a fantastic day.